coming to you from the heatwave city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Huddy Bryce. Tied with the popularly recurring Out of the Dust Geek List on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 68. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring the Omega virus out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Eminent Domain. On the reaction segment, I discuss the board game community's reactions to Black Lives Matter statements. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review pictures. On the obscure Bryce game segment, I review Orongo. And we wrap up the episode by continuing the BGG and my own top 5 countdown of 2015 with the number 2s on the list. I had a chance to bring the Omega Virus, a large box electronic Milton Bradley game from 1992, out of the dust recently. The Omega Virus is from designer Michael Gray of Fortress America and Dungeon fame, and I last played it about 22 years ago. I say about because the 22 years is an estimate, as I obviously haven't been logging plays that long, but it's a conservative estimate, as I'm positive I haven't played this game since I was in high school. It was a regular game in my family game night rotation at the time, though, and I took it with me when I moved out, and I've been hanging on to it all these years. I've been reorganizing and cleaning my board game room, and there was a lot of physical dust on this one to wipe off before inspecting the contents inside the box. The electronics still worked, so I thought it would be a fun one to show my kids. They picked it up and got into it really quickly and had a fun time with it. For me, I'd have to say the game hasn't aged so well, as the mechanics are a little repetitious. But it's a brisk game with some real tension, and I think it'll be a nostalgic treat if I break it out every now and then. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Dave Peters, username Rheinelf, brought Eminent Domain out of the dust. Eminent Domain is a 2011 game from publisher Tasty Minstrel and designer Seth Jeffy. 9 years later, Eminent Domain remains Seth's highest-ranked game, and Dave last played it 6 years ago and currently rates it a 6.66 out of 10. He writes, "It's pretty cute and also something a bit less compelling. Perhaps the right word is derivative, although perhaps it's just a case of attempting an integration of familiar mechanisms, all of which have been pioneered elsewhere. Perhaps my problem is that derivative feels pejorative to me, and I'm not sure of how much of that latter feeling is justified, and how much I just need to get over. In any event, the game makes a good deal of sense and plays cleanly and is a fine fit for a lunch game slot. And so it happened I'd be completely content for a reprise. Thanks for the contribution, Dave. Eminent Domain is still a game I've never played. It's not on my wish list, but I'd play it if someone else wanted to and was willing to teach. This speculative occasion has never come up in any of my game groups, though." Reaction segment time. In the past week, a lot of board game companies, sites, and communities have issued statements of support regarding the Black Lives Matter movement and made pledges of doing better to combat racism in our own little circle of the world, including, but not limited to, Board Game Geek, the Dice Tower, and Board Game Revolution. The response to this from the board gamer community has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm not just talking about vocally positive, but by a sheer count of people liking, upvoting, and commenting their shared support compared to those not, or actively voicing opposition to these statements. The response to the events that have triggered these statements feels different this time. It really feels like general public opinion is turning an important corner on issues of inclusivity, active anti-racism, and Black Lives Mattering. And that's helped by communities like the board gaming community, communities one might necessarily expect to have anything to do with an issue like this, voicing their support and getting involved in whatever way they can. Because racism is an issue that transcends politics and permeates every aspect of culture, including our treasured pastimes like board gaming. Showing and sharing empathy is the least we can do as a community, but it's not all we can do. It's time to stop pretending we've outgrown racism or that it doesn't happen in our cultural sphere just because we may have never experienced it personally or witnessed it in action. It's time to start believing what those who have actually experienced it have been saying the whole time. It's time to stop being passive bystanders and get involved in some way. But what does that look like from a board game community standpoint? What can we as board gamers do to help fight racism? Now, I certainly don't have all the answers, but it's a conversation I'd love to have, and brainstorming ideas is something I'd love to help foster and contribute towards. So I've got a few ideas to get started. First, we can listen. That's something that all communities can do, just as humans. Listening has been undervalued for a long time, but it's the perfect place to start. And let's stop hiding from this issue. There's no such thing as, this isn't the appropriate forum for an issue like this. One of the few negative reactions I saw to the statements being made was on Facebook, where a random person said, "Board games are a haven from the outside world. I come to this page to get away from politics. Let's keep the page about games." This is the wrong attitude, my friends. Yes, board games are a haven, but a haven that isn't inclusive for everyone isn't really a haven at all. A haven that pretends a problem doesn't exist isn't really a haven at all. A haven that buries its head in the sand when it could do something isn't really a haven at all. And that's why these sites, pages, and companies are making these statements affirming that Black Lives Matter. It's been said a lot that all lives can't matter if Black lives don't matter, and that applies to the board game community too. It's time that all communities stood together in this statement, and board gamers can do their part. Which brings me to my last immediate idea. We need to stop isolating ourselves. Eventually, conventions will start happening again, and when they do, and we start attending again, let's stop isolating ourselves in our protective bubbles and venturing beyond our small circles of friends. Let's make some new friends. Let's start making our circles larger and more diverse. And that's something we can start reaching out to do right now. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Pictures, the Spiel des Jahres nominated game for publisher Rio Grande, and designers Christian and Daniela Storr. This is the second game from this design duo, but their other game, a 2014 release called Schlablocker, was never released in North America and is quite obscure. As a Rio Grande game, and consequently not promoted at all, Pictures might well have become an obscure title as well. Indeed, like many people, when the Spiel nominations were made, I saw the title Pictures and thought, what the heck is this game I've never heard of before? So when Spielbound, Omaha's local board game cafe, got some copies in, I volunteered to inventory and catalog their library copy so I could try it out and see what the game was all about. Did the Spiel des Jahres committee make the right decision in nominating the game? Well, here's how the game worked. A 4x4 grid of photograph cards are dealt out into the center of the table at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of each of the 5 rounds, players draw a coordinate token from the drawstring bag that corresponds to one of the 16 photograph cards. Simultaneously, each player uses their unique building material set to represent the photograph they are assigned. The block set uses 7 traditional shaped toy blocks to create the picture. The shoestring set uses 2 strings of different lengths. The cube set uses a small picture frame that can hold 9 of 24 colored game cubes. The sticks and stones set uses 4 rocks and 4 twigs. The icon cards use a small deck of 19 cards that each depict a different graphic icon. After each player has finished representing their assigned photograph with their unique building set, they will write down which coordinate they think each of their opponent's creations represent. Then, players will take turns revealing their coordinate token and scoring 1 point for each coordinate token they guess correctly, and 1 point for each player who guesses theirs correctly. At the conclusion of each round, players pass their building set, so they have a turn to build with each of the 5 different ones, and naturally, the player with the most points at the end of the game wins. This is a super fun party game, and after trying the game out with my family and returning the catalog copy to the Spielbound library, I bought one of the remaining copies for myself. It strikes a similar kind of creative associative chord that a game like Concept Codenames or Dixit strikes, but the unique building material sets bring something new and fresh to this genre of games. I'm also amused that I'm actually paying money for a game that has literal sticks and stones in it. After several games, each member of my family has developed favorite and least favorite building sets to work with, so it's nice that these all get passed around during the course of the game, and each player is challenged to work with each one. It would also be very easy to make some expansions with additional building sets, which would be super fun. Both building and guessing provides a fun challenge, and this is one of those games where it's just as entertaining to hear a player's explanation of how the heck they thought their weird creation was supposed to represent the picture they were assigned as it is to correctly deduce another player's creation. As soon as more people become exposed to this game, I can see this game really taking off. I can see this game really taking off as a go-to game for casual settings or as an opener or closer of heavier game nights. After his handful of initial plays, my oldest son has declared that this is his new favorite game, replacing Karuba. And this despite not even winning any of our plays yet. Though, like concept, this isn't a game that one should pay too much attention to the score. The Spiel Committee hasn't been shy about awarding games like this one the top honor, and I think Pictures is innovative enough that I'm making it my new favorite ahead of Nova Luna for the Spiel win, though I'm not sure when I'm going to have a chance to play and judge my city. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on the podcast, I'm going to tell you about Orongo, a 2014 Easter Island themed game from Ravensburger and prolific designer Rainer Knizia. This game didn't make it over to North America right away after its release, and it was never widely distributed here, which I think contributed to it never taking off and always being something of an obscure title. I'm only aware of it because several years ago, after learning Giants from Matago, I added almost every Easter Island themed game in the BGG database to my wishlist. Orongo sat there for years until it connected with me earlier in the year in a math trade. It possesses a straightforward rule set, and it didn't take me long to get it to the table. I actually made it one of my birthday games because it was one of my highest priorities to play from my unplayed shelf after I acquired it. Here's how it works. The board displays a map of Easter Island divided into numbered hexes depicting various icons. At the beginning of each round, a certain player count-dependent number of hexes are drawn from the face-down stock, each one of which corresponds to one of the hexes on the map and are placed on the map. These hexes, as well as empty palm hexes, are the only ones that can be built on with player color markers. A closed fist auction then takes place using the shell currency of the game. The winner of the auction gets to place 3 player color markers on the map, the second place bidder 2, and everyone else just 1. All of the winning bids and half of the second place bid goes into a communal pot, and anyone who bids 0 splits the pot. This is the only way to get more shells during the game because the game features a very tight closed economy that, like the more well-known The Estates, depletes itself over the course of the game, getting even tighter as the game goes along. Besides being used in auctions, shells are also used to mark hexes on the map after the resource icons on the hex have been used. Because what players are trying to do with these hexes that they place player color markers on is build networks of their pieces joining together the various resource hex tiles that come into play. When a certain combination of resource hexes are linked to a coastal hex, a player can cover up the resource hexes with shells and erect one of their moai statues on the coastal hex. The first player to erect all of their moai immediately wins the game. The best part of the estates is that shrinking economy and the strategic decision that comes along with determining how much of a limited fund to bid and win. That's the best part of Orongo as well, and the auctions are extra important because they also determine turn order, which can literally determine who wins a game with a race objective like this one. I'm a big fan of these timing mechanics, and they elevate Orongo to one of the more memorable Knizia games. Unfortunately, the game is held back by its components, which is a shame because aesthetically, those components are really nice. But functionally, they leave a lot to be desired. In fact, I haven't played a game where the components got in the way of the gameplay like Orongo's does in a long time. The shells are delightfully tactile. Unfortunately, they're too round and easily roll off the hex tiles they need to stay on. The player-colored markers are clear plastic discs, which is a good design decision in the sense that it enables players to see the resources underneath them, but a bad design decision in the sense that they are super slippery, slide easily off the tiles they need to stay on, and the moai statues slip off of them at the slightest touch or jostling of the table. The statues are really nice oversized meeples and lend nice table presence to the game, but since they must be erected on the edges of the map, they also interfere with hand movement of placing other pieces on the map. This all is a real shame because it's one of the better looking Ravensburger games I've come across, but it comes at the expense of functionality, which is really tragic. The solid engaging mechanics are enough for me to keep the game in my collection, but there are some undexterous people I'm aware of that will make me think twice of playing this game with, because of purely practical reasons. We continue my review of the top 5 games ranked on BGG from 5 years ago and comparing them to my own personal top 5 games from 5 years ago to see how they match up with the number 2s this episode. The number 2 game from 2015 on BGG is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, the very slight reworking of Vlaada Chvátil's modern classic Through the Ages, which was the number 2 game on all of BGG for a long time. I've played New Story of Civilization on Board Game Arena a few times now, and it honestly feels almost identical to its precursor. It's barely worthy of creating a new entry on BGG, in my opinion. Still, if you're going to play this system, you might as well play the newest iteration, because the few slight adjustments they made were all good things to improve on. I still don't think the game is better than Nations, though, so it's not a game I've added to my own collection. I just think Nations does everything that Through the Ages does, and does it better, and in a much more interesting way. In addition, New Story of Civilization works so well and moves so much faster online compared to physical play that I'm not sure I will ever add New Story to my collection. Improved play online was the reason I originally traded away my copy of the original Through the Ages, in fact. But I'd probably pick it up if the price were right. My own personal number 2 game from 2015 is Between Two Cities, the semi-cooperative tile drafting and laying game from Stonemaier Games. I'm a fan of everything Stonemaier has made, but Between Two Cities remains my favorite game from their catalog. It's just such a unique game. One could make the compelling argument that it's the only semi-cooperative game ever made that actually works well. I love the subtle negotiation element of the game that comes into play as you work out with your neighbors which tile they should place in our shared city from the ones they drafted. There's some wonderful tension at the end as the scores are calculated as well. This game always comes down to the wire is super close and seems like just a single tile here or there makes all the difference. It's a deliciously tight game with some delightful risk-reward analysis built into choosing which tiles to draft when, and I continue to admire the genius game design decision of adding those double-sized tiles into the mix. The expansion is okay, but hardly necessary, though the player terrain boards mix things up in an interesting way, and you might as well play with them if you have them. I'm less a fan of the spin-off Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig because of the convoluted scoring involved in that one. But 5 years later, Between Two Cities is still my 7-player game of choice and a game I never turned down the chance to play. Well, that will do it for episode 68. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Dust Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at OutOfTheDustBGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14. Or email me at radagast14@CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Dust conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. All right, play me out, Ananda!